As we plan to create the cities of tomorrow, we have an opportunity to think of more equitable cities. In these new cities, innovative design and new technologies allow all citizens or visitors to have a better access to mobility, infrastructure, and services. So before we make our city smarts, we need to ask ourselves, are we designing smart cities for all? G3 ICT is an advocacy initiative launched in December 2006 in the United Nations Global Alliance for Information and Communication Technologies and Development with the mission of promoting the rights of persons with disabilities in the digital age. To help us reflect on how to make cities more equitable, joining us from Atlanta, Georgia, I would like to invite James Thurston, Vice President of Global Strategy and Development of G3 ICT. Welcome, James.
Hi, good morning. I'm actually based in Washington, D.C., but coming to you this morning from Delaware.
Thank you very much, James, and thank you for being with us. I know that it is Thanksgiving, right?
It is. I'm in my kitchen and I'm actually cooking all around. Hopefully you can't see.
So now, James, the digital stage is now yours.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. As Ravi mentioned, we are an international nonprofit organization set up with support of the UN, and we focus on the human rights and digital inclusion of the more than 1 billion people with disabilities around the world. And we do that in a lot of different ways by working directly with companies, with governments, with cities. But also we run the International Accessibility Professional Society. So people who have accessibility as part of their job can get training and certification at the professional society. And the question that Ravi asked that I like to ask with audiences and with partners is, are we today designing smart cities for everyone, for all? And I can tell you the answer up front is no, we're not, but we can be. We absolutely can be. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can do that. As we all know, the world is rapidly urbanizing. Half of the global population today lives in cities. That will rise to 70% by the year 2050. Another trend that we see around the world is the incredible digital transformation of society, every sector of society, including much of what happens in cities. And these two trends of urbanization and digital transformation come together in a really unique and exciting way, I think, in smart cities. They're big business, and they're really smart cities today, I think, are redefining how we as human beings interact with technology and with each other. A friend of mine, well, if you think about cities and the services they offer, from public safety to education to healthcare services, transportation for sure, all of these are increasingly being supported or delivered by technology. A colleague of mine and friend who is an urban planner and a person with a disability often says that that he loves smart cities. He loves the innovation. He loves what's meant to be the ease of using these smart solutions to be a member of a community, a citizen of a city. But those smart cities don't love him back as a person with a disability. And I want to talk a little bit about that. There's about a billion people in the world today with a disability. That's about 15% of the population. So you can think of 15% of your city, 15% of your company is likely to be a person with a disability. Importantly, you're not necessarily going to know someone has a disability. About 70% of disabilities are not something that you would recognize just by looking at a person. It could be a cognitive disability or a hearing disability. So the number of people with disabilities in our cities, in our societies, is really significant. And disability, what we're talking about is it could be a hearing disability, a visual disability, a cognitive or intellectual disability. And importantly, as part of this, we know that people with disabilities in every country around the world have higher rates of poverty, higher rates of unemployment. They're less likely to start and finish school. So outcomes for people with disabilities are critical, and the kinds of services that cities are delivering are really important to improving on those outcomes for people with disabilities. So accessibility matters in smart cities. And by accessibility, what I'm talking about is smart solutions and technology deployments that actually work for everyone. They're usable by everyone. And the good news is that there are global ICT accessibility standards that define what it means to be usable, to be accessible for every kind of technology and every kind of disability. These standards have been developed by industry and governments and civil society organizations over a period of 10 years or more. They're robust, they're testable, and they're really out there and able for cities to use them, although unfortunately cities probably aren't using them as much as they need to be. And if you think about it, so with transportation and mobility services, a ticketing kiosk, if it's not designed correctly, a wheelchair won't be able to get up to it. If it's not designed correctly in the placement of the keyboard and the screen, a person with mobility disabilities would not be able to use it. Likewise, with digital payments, for people with cognitive disabilities, those systems may time out too quickly for them to actually use them. That's an issue of inaccessibility of a smart solution. With citizen engagement, there's an amazing array of citizen engagement solutions out there that are being developed and deployed by cities, digital 311 systems. It's a way to push information out and get information and perspective back from your citizens. Too often, those are not accessible. I live in Washington, D.C., especially during this pandemic. My city, which is a smart city, has a COVID dashboard where every day it updates data on hospitalization rates, testing rates, really critical information that I look at every day, but the website's not accessible. So someone with a visual disability is not going to have access to that information that is really critical in these times. A colleague of mine who was the commissioner for the city of Chicago, the third biggest city in the US, often says that crises, emergencies like the pandemic, they really reveal and make much more clear things we already know. And we know that today, smart cities are making the digital divide for people with disabilities bigger, not smaller. When we launched our Smart Cities for All initiative several years ago, we did a global study, and it really did confirm this fact, unfortunately, that technology deployments are not working for people with disabilities. About 60% of the hundreds of experts that we surveyed around the world said smart cities today are failing people with disabilities. Just 18% of these experts knew of a smart city who was using these very robust global standards for accessibility. And we actually even surveyed entrepreneurs in incubators and accelerators who were creating great new solutions for smart cities. And fully a third of them had no idea whether or not the solutions that they were creating, these great new innovations, were accessible or not. So we have a real problem with accessibility and inclusion when it comes to smart cities today. The good news is that we've actually over the years created a toolkit that's available in 9 languages, including French and English for our Canadian guests. And we've identified tools that we know address some of the big barriers in a city being both smarter and more inclusive. So there's a guide to the top 3 priority accessibility standards that every city CIO and IT department should know about. There's a guide to actually adopting a procurement policy that helps a city, when it's investing in buying technology, make sure that what they're buying is accessible. We've seen that be incredibly impactful in governments around the world. There's a guide to actually just make the case for a commitment to and capability on accessibility in your city, and come to that from a human rights perspective, but also make the case from a business and technology perspective. There's a database of solutions, which we're not making public yet, but where we're gathering mainstream smart city solutions and looking at them from an accessibility perspective. We have an inclusive innovation playbook. So I mentioned accelerators and incubators. Most smart cities are working with an innovation ecosystem, but typically those accelerators and incubators are not creating new solutions that are accessible. So this playbook helps the city be a better partner focused on inclusion with its innovation ecosystem. And finally, we have a set of maturity models or assessment tools that look at how a city is becoming smarter and more inclusive from 27 different variables. Things like the city's strategic intent, its leadership, its budget. How are all of these things helping it be smarter, but also more inclusive at the same time? Its culture of innovation, a culture of diversity, and importantly also its technology and how it's using data and deploying technology. Interestingly, we actually adapted that assessment tool for universities. Universities are like small cities. They're deploying technology, they're using data, and so we have a version of that assessment tool for smart universities as well now. All of this information is on our on our website, smartcitiesforall.org. So with that, I'd like to end just by saying that emphatically, we really can design smart cities for inclusion. It's not hard to do. Much of this is about awareness and using some of these tools. I would encourage cities to go out, look at the toolkit, consider getting an assessment of how you're deploying technology and using data as a smart city. Is it promoting inclusion? With companies, absolutely start thinking about engaging people with disabilities in the design process so that your solutions are usable by everyone. And for civil society organizations, disabled persons organizations in your cities, get actively involved with your city on how they're testing their smart solutions in their technology deployments to make sure that they are accessible. So Robbie, thank you very much. And I encourage you to check out our toolkit.
Thank you very much, James. I have a few questions, maybe two. I was wondering, when you were talking about the culture of diversity in smart city, I was wondering, maybe it's a philosophical question, is it possible to create a city that is responsible, accessible, and answering to needs of all people regardless of our challenges?
It absolutely is. And interestingly, in the first iteration, when we were piloting this assessment tool, we didn't have culture of diversity in there. We had culture of innovation and culture of community engagement. But we added that because what we found is that cities that hire people with disabilities and cities that train their employees on disability and accessibility do much better at being accessible and inclusive in addition to being smart. So that culture of diversity is critical. And we see leading companies around the world also trying to build that culture of diversity, including from a disability perspective. And they actually see it as a competitive advantage in the marketplace.
And the last question that I have for you, James, is you were talking about the Smart Cities Toolkit, and I find it very interesting, but I was wondering, who are the users or the future users of the toolkit?
We would love for cities to be downloading it. We're working with cities with the toolkit around the world. We do work in every region of the world, the global north and the global south. Every city, it doesn't matter, is using technology. We let cities kind of self-define if they're smart. If they have a website and a mobile app and they want to be a smart city, great. Just make sure it's accessible. So the toolkit's available to everyone. It's on our website. We deploy it through partners. I should mention just last week, in a partnership with the World Economic Forum and the G20 Smart City Alliance at the Smart City Expo in Barcelona, we launched a tool that we created for that alliance, the G20 Alliance. And so we deploy through much larger partners like the World Economic Forum and the G20 Alliance as well.
Thank you very much, Jim, for your time. I know that it's Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving, and thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you so much.